What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Carl's Bait and Tackle Tips and Tricks video. I'm Matt from SBFishingTV, and today we're going to be going over a few different baits that I got off of Shop Carl's that I've been doing really well with this winter. So it's really cold out. I finally was able to find some open water. When I launched the boat, there was about an inch of ice and I had to break through all of that. It took me about 40 minutes to get to this spot when normally it takes about 10. So I made it, that's all that matters. But let's take a look at some of these baits. The Storm Suspending Wild Eye Swim Shad is actually a newer bait to me, and it's really neat in the fact that it actually has a hard body, so this thing is really durable. It has a light paddle tail action to it, and on top of that it suspends, so if you're reeling it slowly back to the boat and you just kill it, it'll slowly come to a stop and suspend in the water column, which there's not many swim baits out there that do that. Actually, I'm not even sure if there are any swim baits out there that do that, so it's pretty innovative and it's something that the fish haven't really had the chance to see. So it's a really interesting bait, good for clean water and when you want to slow roll a swim bait around. I wouldn't call this a big swim bait. It's 4 inches long and it's really not too big of a profile. It's really great. Sticking with swim baits, I had to pick up some Carl's Amazing Baits Freestyle Junior. So this is just a paddle tail swim bait. It has a light kind of finesse action to it. That boot tail on the back just slowly kicks. I like throwing this, especially in the winter, on just a jig head, just bare, or on an underspin. It also works really well on an Alabama rig too. But for today, we are going to be throwing that around on the VMC Finesse Half Moon jig head. This is a 1/4 ounce. You just slide this swim bait right up the hook, and it works really well. I like throwing it for suspended fish in clear water, and you can also drag this along the bottom too, but works really well, looks really good, and it's a great winter presentation for these fish. So another really good bait for clean winter water with finicky fish is going to be a jerk bait. So this is a Rapala X-Wrap. I got it in the albino shad color. I'm really prone to throwing these in clean water. I know people catch jerkbait fish in somewhat dingy water, but I personally just don't have too much confidence doing it. But if I find myself in clear water situations like we're gonna have today, I have no problem throwing the jerkbait around. I also find that jerkbaits tend to catch really big fish. I mean, they'll catch smaller ones too, but there's something about the jerkbait that those bigger winter fish just can't resist. And another bait that big fish can't resist all year is your jig. This is Missile Bait's Ike Mini Flip Jig. It's a 1/2 ounce in black and blue. What I really like about Ike's Mini Flip Jig, especially in the winter, is that it has that smaller profile to it. So I'm going to be throwing Ike's Mini Flip Jig around today, paired up with Carl's Amazing Baits double wide chunk trailer. And what I really like about the double wide chunk trailer is that there's really not going to be too much action with this. It's going to have a little bit of a flap to it. Since these claws aren't flanged and the plastic just remains straight, it just has very minimal action, which helps catch a little bit more fish in the winter. Last but not least, we have another crawl from Carl's Amazing Baits, and this is the kicker crawl. So this one is pretty similar to that double wide chunk trailer, where the claws on the end are not really flanged. They do widen up a bit at the tip, so it will have a little bit of action. It also has these appendages running up the side, but this is something I'm gonna throw on a really light jig head and just drag the bottom with. Maybe a shaky head or a swing head jig, or even a really light Texas rig should do the job. Well, we're gonna rig these baits up. We're gonna go over what rods I'm throwing them on and why, and then hopefully we'll be able to run into some of these cold water bass. So we're gonna start off throwing the Freestyle Junior around on the VMC Half Moon jig head, and you can see I just slid it right up the shank of the hook. It's a perfect finesse swim bait. I'm going to be casting it around and just slow rolling it back to the boat in the middle of the water column, and I'm going to try fishing it on the bottom a little bit as well. I'm fishing it on a 7-foot medium light spinning rod. I have 20-pound braid and a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. I'm not doing too much with this swim bait setup besides casting and retrieving it back slowly. In the winter, these fish don't want to move around too much, and I find that just a slow and steady retrieve does really well. You can throw some hops and pauses in there as well, in case you do have a fish following that bait. It'll help trigger them a little bit. Well, we haven't had any luck on the swim bait yet, so I'm gonna pick up the jig and see if they want something on the bottom. Just a little slower. As far as spots go, when I'm fishing a jig in the winter, I'm definitely looking for spots that have a lot of rock and wood and any sort of deep water near shallow water. So if you have a really steep channel drop next to like a pretty decent sized flat, generally you're going to be able to find some fish holding there. If you're out on a nice winter day and the sun's beating down, generally those fish will move up a bit shallower, and you'll be able to find them on top of that break line. And you'll be able to catch them a little bit shallower than fishing your 15 to 20 to 30 feet deep. And fishing a jig along those breaks is always a really good spot. Can't go wrong with flipping deeper docks or, you know, dragging jigs along points. And this goes for pretty much all of the baits we're going over today. Since this is a lighter jig and a little bit more on the finesse side, I'm fishing it on a 6'9" medium heavy rod with 15-pound fluorocarbon. And for the most part, I'm sticking with 15-pound fluorocarbon and under for the Ikes mini flip jig. They do have a finesse thin wire hook on there. And if you're throwing 20-pound test and a flipping stick, there's a good chance you can break that hook. Something else that I really like to key in on is cleaner water in the winter. That's another one of those scenarios where, oh, that's a fish. Ooh, jig in. There we go, Ikes mini flip jig. So this fish came on the Ikes mini flip jig, caught it in about 7 or 8 feet of water out on this shallow tapering point, which goes right into a channel. Really sunny, sun is just beating down on it, and this dude was up there. Let's see if there's any more. Right now I'm sitting ridiculously shallow, but on the other side of this point, it drops off into a channel. And I'm sitting in the shallow water, casting out to the deep water, and just slowly dragging this jig across. So as I was saying right before that fish ate, sometimes being able to find clean water, even if it's a bit shallower, can be really beneficial to you, even if you're fishing in the winter. I think it's time to throw the X wrap around a little bit. As I was saying earlier, definitely a confidence bait in clean water. One of my favorite things to throw when the water gets really clean. I think it has a lot of drawing power. If you have, 10 feet of clarity and you get this jerk bait within 8 feet of a fish and he's able to see the jerk bait, a lot of times they'll at least come up and check it out if they're interested at all, even a little bit. Even if they don't want to eat, sometimes they'll come up and just look at it. I'm sure a lot of you guys have had situations where you're bringing your jerk bait back to the boat and there's a fish right on its tail. Also, in the same situation I was talking about earlier with finding those warmer pockets or fishing a little bit shallower, the jerk baits can be absolutely deadly towards the end of winter in those a little bit shallower, cleaner, warmer pockets. So my jerk bait setup is a 6'8" medium moderate action rod. I want something that will have a lot of give if a fish eats it, and when I'm fighting it to the boat, I definitely don't want it to have too much power because of the treble hooks. So I like having a rod that has some play in it, and a little bit lighter action or more moderate action. I find that I just catch more fish. It's not going to rip those hooks out. Throwing it on a moderate speed gear ratio reel and 12-pound fluorocarbon. If you're fishing around an area where you're seeing a bunch of suspended bait on your graph, it's definitely one of those spots that you can't go wrong fishing a jerk bait. And it also surprisingly works pretty darn well around docks and sticky cover. If you have like a big down tree working the outsides and the front of it, it can catch you some giants. I've been throwing the freestyle shad around quite a bit on the half moon jig head. And I think for this area, that's just a little bit heavy. So I downsized my weight to a 1/10 ounce jig head, and I have the kicker craw. We're gonna try dragging it on the bottom. I also think these fish are eating off the bottom right now a little bit more than suspended in the water column. So the kicker craw is a bait that I'm gonna throw on a Ned head or a light Texas rig. You can throw it on the back of a jig too, nothing wrong with that. It's gonna beef up that presentation a little bit. But this is something that I'll pick up generally if the jig bite is just not happening. Sometimes the fish just want something a little bit more finesse, and that's when I'll downsize from throwing a jig and pick up either a Texas rig or a Ned head and just throw something just like this craw and see if I can't make it happen with that. Sticking with the cold water theme, I'm working this Ned head with the kicker craw pretty slow. Really just dragging it along the bottom and letting it sit. Fish! Oh God, sorry buddy. Look at this little guy. Well, that's not the size we're looking for. Personally, I'm happy with any fish when it's this cold out. Little guy, see ya. Oh, I'm on that log. Get out of there, baby. Come here. There we go. There's another one. Oh, I frayed my 6-pound test up so bad. All right. There we go. Another decent fish on the kicker craw. Gonna put him back, and I'm actually gonna pick up that storm suspending swim bait. See if we can't get a bigger fish. Well, we've caught a few dinks today. I've seen a couple bigger fish, and this is one of those situations where I'm gonna pick up the storm wild eye suspending swim shad. I'm gonna focus fishing this near deeper water, probably get out here on this point where it drops off on that other side and fish it around there a little bit. And there's also a mud line over to the right, which I'm gonna try to keep this right in the middle of. What's really cool about this is it sinks very, very slowly, so you can barely reel it. And you can see that tail has a little bit of kick to it, and then pause it, and it'll suspend. I'm throwing it on a 7.4 medium heavy, 20-pound fluoro. And to be honest with you, you can definitely throw this on a lighter setup. You can get away with a 7-foot medium heavy. It's not a heavy bait by any means. So I'm just gonna make as long as a cast as I can and slowly reel it back to the boat and pause it every once in a while. When it comes to finding places to pick up and throw this swim shad around, if you keep in mind where you're fishing that jerk bait, pretty much want to fish it in the exact same situations. Anytime you're seeing suspended bait, anytime you got clean water, you can fish it around cover, you can fish it on points, you can fish it on break lines. This thing, I mean, it's just like a perfect little swim bait. It's also not overly big in the sense that you won't be confident throwing it. It's pretty small, good looking bait, and the fact that it suspends is just really cool. I've never seen a swim bait like this that suspends. Alright guys, that's where I'm going to end this one off. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button on Carl's YouTube channel, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.